The sun had not yet risen over the dense jungle, the morning thick with mist and the smell of wet earth. As Sergeant Kane adjusted his radio headset, the static crackling in the early light, and then silence, a pause that stretched into minutes, hours, where no signal came through, and every second felt like a warning. The team in the field, moving silently, their boots sinking into mud, heavy with rain, and the forest seemed to swallow, sound leaving only tension in its place. Corporal Diaz crouched, low, scanning the tree line, his eyes sharp and his fingers gripping his rifle, the silence pressing down like a living thing. The last message from command had been routine, yet now it felt distant, meaningless. The radio dead, and the jungle alive, with unknown movement, every rustle a potential threat, and he could feel his heartbeat sinking with the faint snapping of twigs somewhere ahead. The team stopped, suddenly sensing a presence that made the air itself feel charged, and the forest seemed to wait for their next move. Lieutenant Harper motioned the squad forward, his voice a whisper in the humidity, thick with sweat and anticipation. The river ahead glimmering faintly in the dawn light. The radio silent as if it had vanished along with every hope of connection. The men exchanged glances, eyes wide with unspoken fear. Each step deliberate, careful, and yet the feeling of being hunted grew heavier. And even the birds seemed to hold their breath, the shadows shifting in patterns that made it impossible to know friend from foe. Suddenly, a distant crack echoed through the canopy, the squad freezing in place, the leaves trembling as if alive, a predator, or perhaps a warning, the mud sucking at their boots, every movement slow and calculated. Diaz tightened his grip, his mind racing through possibilities, the jungle silent except for the faint whisper of wind and the unrelenting pulse of adrenaline in their veins, and they realized that every moment now carried life or death consequences, and the radio offered no reassurance. Only silence. Kane motioned them toward a cluster of trees offering cover, their breaths shallow, the morning light filtering through mist and branches making ghostly shapes across the ground, the squad moving. As shadows themselves, every footstep measured the radio dead and command unaware of their situation. The river ahead both a guide and a danger. A path through unknown perils, and every instinct screamed that the jungle was watching them and that the hours of silence were not empty, but pregnant with threat. The squad paused near the water's edge, listening to the faint ripple of the current over rocks, the radio still dead, their only guide the map etched into their minds, and the compass heavy. In Kane's hands, the mud sticky under their boots, the leaves damp with dew and blood perhaps of animals, or worse, the forest alive with hidden eyes, every sound amplified, and Kane whispered for silence. The squad obeying instincts, honed through training, and the feeling of being observed intensified, and none of them spoke, knowing that noise could be fatal. Diaz spotted movement in the underbrush, fleeting glimpses of dark shapes darting just beyond vision, the team freezing their bodies taut, every muscle ready to respond, the radio dead, their link to the outside world severed, and the sense of isolation pressing down the forest, seeming endless, every shadow potentially fatal, and Kane gestured forward, knowing that staying in place meant certain death, and moving could lead them straight into unseen danger. The river widened suddenly, revealing a fallen tree bridge slick with moss, the squad crossing carefully, their weight distributed across the rotting trunk, the water below swift and unforgiving. The radio dead and command unaware, their lives balanced between the earth and the rushing current below every step, a calculated risk, the jungle around them alive with whispering leaves and snapping twigs, and each heartbeat marking the hours lost in silence and tension, and the squad realizing that survival depended on every ounce of focus. Suddenly, a flare of light flickered through the trees ahead, the squad freezing shadows flickering on their faces. Kane motioned for caution. The movement. Erratic, perhaps. Natural. Perhaps not the radio dead and their minds straining for logic. Every sound amplified the pounding of their own hearts, the river ahead a reminder that escape was possible, but fraught with danger, and the jungle seemed to press closer with every passing second, making the air heavy and the light uncertain. Harper whispered for them to hold position, the flare pulsing faintly in the mist, a warning or perhaps a lure. The team crouched in mud and brush muscles taut and breathing shallow, the jungle alive with unknown eyes, the radio dead and command oblivious. The hours stretching into infinity. Every sound amplified into potential threat, and every shadow a story of what could be waiting for them just beyond sight. And the squad realizing that the flare marked a choice point between survival and disaster. A low rumble echoed from the river downstream. Perhaps a landslide. Perhaps animals moving the squad froze, listening, the mud sucking at boots each step cautious. The jungle pressing from all sides, the radio dead and hours lost to silence, making each second feel monumental. Kane signaled forward, knowing that hesitation could be deadly, and yet every movement carried risk. The mist thickening around them shadows, merging with light, and the forest holding its breath for what was about to come. Suddenly movement exploded from the underbrush, dark shapes charging toward them, the squad reacting instantly, ducking and rolling through mud and brush bullets ripping. The air, the radio dead, and command unaware, their world reduced to second survival instincts, training and the roar of adrenaline, every sense alive, and Kane realizing that the forest itself seemed to conspire to hide danger, and that the next minutes would define who would survive the hours of silence and who would be claimed by the jungle. The squad scattered into cover, mud and blood and sweat mixing as they returned, fire shadows shifting around them. Kane leading through instinct and memory. The river behind a guide and a threat, the flare flickering still in the distance, the jungle alive with sound and motion, the radio dead and hours stretching into eternity, each heartbeat marking life and death, and Kane realizing that the silence that had gripped them for so long was now filled with the sound of survival struggle and firelight. Minutes stretched into hours, the fight moving through mud and brush, the squad coordinating through gestures and instinct, bullets tearing through, leaves the river churning in reflection of dawn. The flare still flickering faintly, and the radio dead, the squad realizing that every sound could be danger, and every shadow could hide death, and Kane understanding that what they were surviving was not just an ambush, but a test of endurance, courage, and skill, and that the hours of silence had prepared them for what they would face next. Then, as suddenly as the chaos began, it stilled the shapes, retreating the forest, returning to quiet, the mud caked on faces and uniforms, the sweat mixing with blood and rain, the flare dimming in the mist, the river flowing relentless, the radio dead and command unaware of the ordeal. The squad huddled together, catching breath, every muscle tense, the jungle silent, and the hours of dead air leaving only the anticipation of what would come next, and Kane knowing that the real test was only beginning. The jungle remained silent after the initial chaos, but the air still thrummed with tension, every leaf trembling with hidden movement. Sergeant Kane signaled the squad to move cautiously through the mud-soaked underbrush, each step deliberate, their boots sinking into the soft earth, the river behind them gurgling faintly, as if reminding them that escape was both close and treacherous. The flare they had seen flickered faintly ahead like a ghost, and the squad knew they were being watched. Corporal Diaz led the way, eyes scanning constantly for any motion shadows stretching unnaturally between trees. The radio still dead command, unaware of their position and every instinct screaming danger around them. The hours of silence had sharpened their senses. Each snap of a twig, the hint of movement, a potential ambush, and the squad moved in tight formation, trusting only their training and each other, the mist curling low over the river and the mud beneath their boots, hiding threats from every Direction, Lieutenant Harper paused to gesture toward a narrow path between two massive trees, the squad crouching low as he motioned them forward, the jungle pressing in all directions, the radio dead and their only guidance, their memory of maps and coordinates, and the river which twisted and turned through the dense foliage, every sound amplified by tension, the squad moving silently, knowing that one wrong step could be fatal. And the shadows ahead seemed to shift, as if alive watching, their every motion. Suddenly a faint splash echoed from the riverbank. Diaz froze, signaling the squad to halt, every muscle taut. The mist swirling thick and heavy around them, the jungle vibrating with unseen presence, the radio still dead hours of silence now stretching into unease every second, a test of nerves and skill, the squad realizing that the threat was not only human, but the jungle itself with its treacherous ground, hidden roots and sudden drops waiting for one misstep to claim. Kane motioned them forward again through thick mud and over-tangled roots. The squad moving like shadows blending with the forest. The sound of distant birds absent, as if the entire ecosystem were holding its breath. The flare ahead, pulsing, faintly now revealing glimpses of shapes moving with intent, the radio dead leaving them blind to support or orders, and each heartbeat pounding through their chests as if marking the rhythm of a silent war. The squad sensing that survival depended on every ounce of focus. Suddenly, a loud crack from above made the squad dive into the mud leaves snapping as a branch fell narrowly missing Harper. The squad frozen in place, hearts hammering the radio dead, and the river a distant witness to the unfolding tension. The mist swirling around them, the jungle alive and unpredictable, every sound amplified fear and anticipation mixing into a storm of adrenaline. Kane signaling forward again, knowing that hesitation could be fatal, and every second felt like an eternity in the silence. The squad continued along the riverbank, mud pulling at their boots every step, a struggle against nature itself. The flare ahead now brighter, revealing shapes partially obscured by mist. Kane scanning constantly. For ambush or trap, the radio dead hours passing and the air thick with anticipation and danger, each shadow seeming to move with purpose, and the squad realizing that they were entering a space where the jungle and enemy could be indistinguishable, and that every breath could reveal them to danger. Suddenly movement erupted from the underbrush, dark figures charging through the mist, the squad reacting instantly, diving behind trees and into mud, their weapons firing the radio dead, leaving no hope of call for backup, every shot echoing through the silent jungle, the river bubbling in reflection of dawn, the flare casting eerie light across chaos. The squad realizing that the hours of silence had been a prelude to this confrontation and that survival now demanded every ounce of skill, courage, and instinct. Kane directed the squad through the chaos, firing as needed, the mud and rain mixing with blood and sweat as they moved, shadows darting through mist, the flare lighting the scene. With ghostly flickers, the radio dead, and command unaware of the firefight, and each second stretching impossibly long, the jungle seeming to conspire to hide threats from every direction, and the squad understanding that trust in each other and their training was the only thing keeping them alive. The firefight subsided as suddenly as it began, the shapes retreating into the jungle, the squad crouched in mud and brush, catching breath, the river rushing quietly behind them, the flare dimming, slowly, and the radio still dead hours having passed in tension and battle, every muscle taut, the squad realizing that they had survived what could have been a deadly ambush, and Kane knowing that the jungle was still alive with threat and that the hours of silence had prepared them for a test far more intense than expected. Harper motioned them toward a fallen log bridge crossing the river. Careful not to slip the mud and wet wood, treacherous underfoot, the squad moving with calculated steps, the jungle pressing in all around the radio dead, their isolation absolute. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves amplified by tension, the flare flickering faintly, showing glimpses of movement ahead, and the squad sensing that this crossing could be as dangerous as any ambush, and that the river below could claim them if they misstepped. Diaz froze, suddenly sensing something in the mist, the squad halting their movement muscles taut and rifles ready, the radio still dead, the river flowing. Relentless beside them, and every instinct screaming hidden danger ahead, the mist swirling thick, the jungle alive with unseen eyes, and Kane signaling them forward slowly, knowing that caution now could save their lives, and that one wrong move could turn hours of survival into tragedy. The squad moving like shadows through a world holding its breath. Suddenly another splash from the river, the squad diving instinctively into cover, the water churning with unseen movement, the flare flickering, casting long shadows across the mud, the radio dead leaving them blind and isolated every second, a test of nerves, the jungle alive and waiting, every shadow a potential threat, and Kane realizing that the hours of silence had been a calm before, a storm that was now upon them, and that the only way through was to trust each other and their instincts completely. The squad moved slowly along the riverbank again, the mud sucking at their boots, the jungle alive around them, and the flare flickering, as if alive shadows stretching and twisting every step, a potential ambush, the radio dead command, unaware the river flowing beside them, and each second marking tension and danger, the squad understanding that survival now was a battle of skill, courage and nerve, and Kane knowing that they were inches from a confrontation that could end in disaster or triumph. Suddenly Firelight flickered in the distance ahead, the squad freezing hearts pounding the jungle silent except for the river flowing, and the distant crackle of flames, the flare ahead illuminating figures moving cautiously. Kane signaling forward, the squad moving slowly toward the light, the radio still dead, and the hours of silence now broken only by the anticipation of what? They would find the jungle holding its breath, and the squad realizing that this could be the turning point that decided life or death. The squad approached cautiously, mud-caking uniforms, faces streaked with sweat and dirt, the river behind them, a constant reminder of danger, the firelight growing stronger, casting long shadows across the jungle floor, the radio dead and command unaware, the squad knowing that the moment ahead could reveal rescue or ambush, and Kane signaling for extreme caution every second, stretching impossibly long, and the squad sensing that the jungle itself was alive with intent. Suddenly movement erupted from the mist figures breaking into view, the squad reacting instantly, bullets ripping through air, the radio dead and command unaware, the jungle alive with motion and threat. Every second a battle of survival instincts and training, combined, the river rushing beside them, the flare casting ghostly light, the squad realizing that the hours of silence had been a prelude to this confrontation, and that the outcome would be decided by courage, skill, and trust alone. The firelight danced across the mud-streaked faces of the squad, each flicker casting shadows that seemed alive. Sergeant Kane signaled forward, the river rushing behind them every step, a struggle against the slippery banks and tangled roots. The jungle pressing from all sides, the radio dead leaving them isolated and vulnerable, and the squad knowing that one wrong move could send them plunging into the river or straight into the hands of unseen enemies. Corporal Diaz led cautiously, his rifle sweeping the shadows, every sense alive, the air thick with smoke and mist, the flare flickering faintly in the distance ahead, revealing glimpses of movement. Kane motioned the squad to fan out slowly, the mud clinging to boots and uniforms. The jungle silent, except for the rushing river and the distant crackle of flames, every heartbeat echoing the tension and every shadow a potential ambush. The squad moving like phantoms, aware that survival depended on precision, timing, and trust. Lieutenant Harper gestured toward a cluster of fallen trees forming a makeshift barrier, the squad ducking behind cover, breathing shallow, the firelight illuminating shapes ahead. Kane scanning constantly for threats, the radio still dead command unaware of. Their position or the danger they faced, and every second stretching into eternity, the squad realizing that the jungle itself seemed to conspire to hide threats from every direction, and that the hours of silence had only sharpened their awareness. Of the peril, suddenly movement erupted from the underbrush, dark figures charging through the mist. The squad reacting instantly, diving behind mud-soaked cover weapons, firing the radio dead, leaving no hope of backup, every shot echoing through the silent jungle, the river bubbling with reflection of flames, the squad realizing that the hours of dead air had been a prelude to this confrontation, and that survival now depended on courage, skill, and split-second decisions. The jungle alive with danger and unpredictability. Kane directed the squad through the chaos, moving from cover to cover the mud and rain, mixing with blood and sweat bullets tearing through foliage, the firelight flickering across tense faces, the radio dead command unaware of the firefight, the squad coordinating silently through gestures and instinct, every moment stretching the seconds into what felt like hours, and Kane understanding that the jungle itself was testing them and that every move now carried the weight of life and death. The attackers retreated suddenly into the mist, the squad breathing heavily, muscles tense, every sense alert. Kane signaling forward, the river rushing beside them, the flare still flickering faintly, the jungle returning to a deceptive, calm, the radio-dead hours having passed the squad, realizing that the threat was not entirely human, that nature itself could be a deadly adversary, and that the hours of silence had been preparing them for trials far beyond ordinary expectation. Squad moved carefully toward the firelight, the jungle thick with mist and shadow. Every footstep, deliberate Kane scanning constantly for traps or hidden figures, the mud-caking boots and uniforms, the river flowing relentlessly beside them, every sound amplified the sense of danger. The radio dead command unaware, and the squad realizing that each step could be a test of survival and skill, and that only their training and trust in each other would see them through the night. Suddenly, a sharp crack of wood underfoot made the squad freeze, the jungle holding its breath, the firelight flickering, the mist swirling thick. Kane signaling forward slowly, the river rushing beside them, the radio still dead, and the squad aware that the smallest noise could draw attention. The hours of silence and tension sharpening their senses. The shadows ahead seeming to move with intent, and every second stretched into a moment of potential disaster or opportunity. The squad reached a clearing briefly, illuminated by firelight, smoke and haze swirling around them, Kane scanning the edges, every shadow alive with possibility, the river behind a constant reminder of danger and escape, the radio-dead command oblivious, the squad crouched in mud and brush, each second testing nerves and training the jungle, pressing in from all sides. And Kane realizing that this was the climax of their ordeal, that every moment from the hours of silence had led to this confrontation, and that survival depended on courage and precision. Suddenly figures emerged from the mist, the squad reacting instantly, bullets flying, the jungle alive with chaos and threat, the firelight reflecting off mud-streaked uniforms, the radio dead, leaving them completely isolated. Every instinct alive, every motion a test of survival. Kane directing movements calmly yet decisively, the river rushing behind them, the jungle echoing with sounds of struggle and determination, the squad realizing that the outcome rested entirely on their skill, trust, and courage, and the fight intensified with every passing second. Minutes felt like hours, the squad moving through mud and brush, coordinating silently, firing as necessary, the firelight flickering across tense faces, shadows dancing. With the movement of combat, the radio-dead command unaware of their peril. The jungle alive and unpredictable, every sound amplified into danger, every shadow a potential ambush. Kane signaling forward, knowing that hesitation could be fatal and that the next actions would determine who survived the hours of silence and firefight. Suddenly the attackers faltered, retreating into the mist, the squad taking cautious cover, the jungle returning to an eerie calm, the firelight fading slightly, the river flowing relentlessly, the radio dead leaving them isolated, the squad catching their breath, mud and blood streaking their uniforms, the mist curling around them, every sense alert, and Kane realizing that the final test was now not only survival, but finding a way to return to safety through the treacherous jungle that had been alive with danger from the very first moment. Kane signaled the squad to move toward a high ridge. The mud clinging to boots every step calculated the river below, reflecting. Faint light, the jungle alive with shadows and noise. Every sound amplified the radio. Dead hours stretching on, and every second suspenseful. The squad trusting training and each other. Every motion deliberate. The firelight flickering across trees. The mist curling thick and foreboding, and Kane understanding that the jungle had been both adversary and teacher, and the squad realizing that courage, skill, and trust had carried them through what had seemed impossible. The squad climbed the ridge, finally reaching a vantage point, the jungle sprawling endlessly below the river, cutting through the mist, the firelight from their earlier confrontation flickering faintly, the radio dead leaving them alone with the landscape and their exhaustion. Every heartbeat echoing in the silence, the squad breathing heavily, mud-streaking faces, uniforms soaked and torn, and Kane realizing that the ordeal had tested more than physical strength. It had tested mental resolve, trust, and courage, and that, the hours of silence, had been only the beginning of the challenge. Suddenly a distant roar echoed through the trees. The squad freezing the jungle, holding its breath, the firelight illuminating faces streaked with mud and sweat. Kane signaling for caution, the radio dead command. Unaware the roar, neither animal nor entirely human, seeming to shake the air with promise of danger or rescue. The squad aware that the final moments of their ordeal were arriving, and that every instinct and skill, acquired through training, would be tested in the seconds to come. The roar grew closer. The firelight flickering wildly, shadows dancing across trees. The squad crouched in mud and brush, every muscle tense. Kane signaling forward slowly, the river reflecting, light like a ribbon through the jungle. The radio dead, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. And then suddenly through the mist a familiar shape emerged. The Navy SEALs returning, covered in mud and firelight. Their eyes, sharp faces determined, the squad frozen with disbelief. The radio dead hours of silence ending in a moment of awe and relief, and Kane realizing that survival was not just skill, but timing, courage, and the unbreakable bond of trust.